We're actually going to be reading 1 Samuel chapter 17. Now, I've heard that some people consider this to be the greatest chapter in all of the Old Testament, and if you read it, you can see why. The setting of our story today is in a place called the Valley of Elah, which is near Jerusalem, and there are two armies face off. One army is Israel's army, and the other is an army from a group of Philistines. The Philistines had a reputation for being fierce warriors, and they often fought against the Israelites, and their champion or their best warrior was a man named Goliath. And so every day Goliath would stand on the front line, and he would challenge the Israelites to send out their best warrior to fight him. And he said, "Hey, if you send someone to fight me, and if I beat them, then you guys become our slaves. But if you get someone to beat me, then we will become slaves to you." And the Israelites were afraid, and they did not want to fight against this guy because he was huge. He was 6 cubits tall. A cubit is about 18 inches, so that would make him like 9 feet tall. He also wore armor that weighed about 5,000 shekels. That's about 125 pounds of solid bronze. And he had a helmet made of bronze on his head, and he carried a spear made of bronze. It had a sharp end, and it weighed about 300 shekels. That's about 15 pounds. And he also had a shield, and he had a sword. For 40 days Goliath stood there and challenged the Israelites to send out a fighter, but nobody would step up to the plate. Then one day, there was a young man who was just hanging out with his sheep nearby, whose name was David. And when he heard Goliath challenging the Israelites, he got upset. And he went over to the people who were in charge of Israel's army, and he said, "Hey, why don't you just give me some food? I'm hungry. I walked all the way here from Bethlehem." And they didn't pay any attention to him. They were too worried about the giant to pay attention to David. So David went back to where his sheep were, and he stayed there for a while. But then he heard Goliath's taunts again, and he got mad. And this time he went to King Saul, the leader of Israel, and he said, "Hey, let me fight this guy. Why wouldn't you just give me a sword and a spear and a helmet and some armor, and let me get in there and fight him?" But King Saul thought that David was just a young boy, and he thought that David wasn't strong enough to fight Goliath. So he said, "No, you can't fight him. You're too young. Go do something else." So David kept hanging around, and eventually he noticed that King Saul's son, who was named Jonathan, liked him and became friends with him. And David stayed with Jonathan, and Jonathan gave him some of the armor that belonged to Saul, and it was pretty cool armor too. It had been custom made for Saul, and it fit David perfectly. And so David put on this armor, and he went out to fight against Goliath. But when Goliath saw that David was coming, he was kind of laughing at him. And Goliath said, "Hey, are you going to come at me with a sword and a spear? That's pretty funny, but you're too small. Let me get rid of you really quick." And so Goliath took his big spear that weighed about 15 pounds, and he threw it at David. And David dodged it, and it missed him. And then David pulled out his sword, and he fought against Goliath. He tried to stab him, but he couldn't reach Goliath because of all the bronze armor that he was wearing. So David was like, "Okay, I need another plan." And he looked around, and he saw that Goliath had dropped his spear. And so David ran towards Goliath, and he picked up the spear, and he used the spear to stab Goliath right in the chest, and it went right through the armor. And then David pulled out his sword, and he cut off Goliath's head. Then David ran over to the Philistine soldiers, and he took their weapons. And he, along with the Israelites, defeated the Philistines, and they chased them all the way to their city. Now after this battle, King Saul noticed David, and he was like, "Wait, you were the kid who was hanging out here the other day, right? You're the one who whipped Goliath." And David was like, "Yes, it was me." And so then Saul was super happy, and he welcomed David, and he made him a hero, and he even gave his daughter's hand in marriage to David. Now, I think that this story has a lot of great lessons for us. First of all, I think it teaches us that no matter how small or insignificant we feel, God can use us for great things. I mean, David was just a young shepherd boy who felt too small to fight against a giant. But God had a plan for him, and if David hadn't stepped up to the plate, then Goliath would have continued to taunt the Israelites, and they would have continued to lose. Also, I think this story teaches us that we should never underestimate our enemies. I mean, the Israelites underestimated Goliath, and they thought that there was no way that they could win. They were too afraid, and even Saul underestimated David. He thought that David was just a young boy who couldn't do anything, but both of these characters ended up learning their lesson. They learned that they shouldn't underestimate their enemies. Another thing that I want to mention is that this is probably the most famous story from the Old Testament. And it's amazing to me that even people who aren't familiar with the Bible know this story. And there's a reason for that, of course, because it's a good story, it's very exciting, there's lots of action. And I think that it shows us that the Bible isn't just a bunch of boring rules. Now, before we close today's video, I want to remind you to subscribe to our channel. And if you like these type of video, let us your comment down below. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Until next time, I hope that you have a great week.